Hey Rebels, welcome back to the channel. In addition to the weekly analysis, I'd like to go over a chart that I haven't talked about in a few months, the ISM. It's a chart that I'm not really hearing a lot of people talk about right now, but I think that it's going to hold the answers to a lot of questions about the market right now. So if that sounds good, like and subscribe. We're just going to dive right in. One additional note that I'd like to mention is the $1,000 giveaway. I plan to give $1,000 to a community member who is active in the Telegram group or in the videos. Basically, I'm trying to get engagement up on the videos. So if you like the videos and comment on the videos, if I just basically see that you're active on YouTube or in the Telegram group, I'd like to give away $1,000 to an active participant, basically during this trading campaign. I don't have a set date yet, but I would assume in the next month or two is probably when I would likely do that. So anyway, if that sounds good, like I said, like and subscribe, and we're just going to dive right into it. So I have in front of me right now is the ISM, which basically is the business cycle. And right now, anything under 50 is considered contraction. Anything over 50 is considered expansion on a basic sense. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a chart of Bitcoin to this because it's quite helpful to see the two next to each other. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and I'm going to move this to a new pane below, and that's going to get this chart something like this. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go along and just kind of show you how the ISM and the Bitcoin chart is correlated. So let's just kind of walk through here. And I'm going to put a mark here on the peaks of Bitcoin, just so we can kind of get an idea of how these two are related. So the business cycle, typically, what I'm trying to get at here is Bitcoin typically peaks around the peak of the business cycle. Maybe not on the exact tick, but you can tell that it's really not until the ISM starts to peak that we see a peak in Bitcoin. And last cycle was truncated here, where we did get a higher high just briefly, but we basically had our peak in the ISM here in March of 2021, and that was basically the end of the cycle there. We did have expanding liquidity at the time, so we did get a little bit higher prices, but the business cycle itself basically peaked right around here, and then it fell off a cliff. So what we're seeing right now is kind of this sideways chop in the ISM, which we really haven't seen before. This chart here, I mean, goes back to 2012 that you can see on the screen. We typically just dip down, and it's just very cyclical. So this is the longest sideways chop period that we've had for the ISM, the business cycle, effectively. And I think that's essentially what's slowing down the altcoin season. Everybody's waiting for this altcoin season, and it's not going to happen this time. But the charts are really just telling us that, there are reasons, because altcoins are typically the furthest down the risk curve. So things like Bitcoin and Ethereum, yes, they can get that liquidity, but a lot of the altcoins that most people are holding are so far down the risk curve, they're really just not going to see this until there's such excess liquidity in the system that it makes it down that far down the risk curve. So I just wanted to mention this. The ISM is a very important key, the business cycle. One of the reasons why I'm not terribly worried about drawdowns until we get to the end of the cycle, because you can see clearly that we're in a bull market for Bitcoin, and Bitcoin typically doesn't peak until the ISM peaks. So I think we're in good standings there. The other thing that I wanted to mention, I've had a couple comments asking about more fundamental analysis. I typically stick with the technicals, especially during the week, during the weekly analysis, because that's just mostly what I do. But the fundamental analysis that I do is usually like big backdrop stuff. So the whole thesis when I got into crypto in general from the very beginning in 2021, the reason I got into crypto and was so excited about that journey was just understanding the debasement of currency and inflation, and how assets denominated in the dollar will continue to rise as the currency is debased. That's kind of like the major thesis. And then you have to find something that outpaces the debasement and the inflation. So overall, that's like the major overarching thesis that I have in general. Everything is built on top of that first principle. And I have a couple charts here that I wanted to show here. This is the Global Liquidity Index, GMI's Total Liquidity Index versus the NASDAQ. And you can just see how highly correlated these things are to global liquidity or total liquidity. You can see the NASDAQ pretty much just mirrors the total liquidity. And yes, we do have action above and below, maybe a couple standard deviations above and below that trend. But effectively, I think like 90% or so of the price movements are correlated to the liquidity. And same thing with Bitcoin effectively. So yes, Bitcoin does swing above and below this line as people speculate, but basically most of the movements are correlated to global liquidity. So if we can track global liquidity and see what it does, and we just had a breakout in total liquidity not too long ago. And if you go back in this chart, GMI is basically a source on all these. I just had a video that I just watched recently. I encourage you to go watch it. Go to the GMI's channel. That's Raoul Powell and Jillian Biddle, I think is his name. And anyway, they go through in much depth and they can talk about this with much more grace than I can. But effectively, this is the thesis: is that Bitcoin's price is following global liquidity. And after we have these breakouts, you can see that rapid expansion. It contracts, it breaks out, and we have an expansion. And that's kind of what we're seeing right now. We've broken out recently in the global M2, waiting for more of an upthrust in the market. So that can also basically be tied back to the ISM, which I mentioned earlier. The business cycle has just been subdued, going sideways, and we're basically waiting for that to break out to the upside and complete the business cycle because we're just still in contraction. We haven't even hit the expansion phase, and Bitcoin has done extremely well in that environment, considering that the ISM has gone nowhere. We've still done extremely well as far as Bitcoin is concerned. So those are some things that I wanted to just bring to your attention as we're going through the weekly analysis and doing our typical analysis. This is a very important chart that I think is hopefully going to give some, hopefully, kind of give some hopium, I guess, basically, because there's still hope yet. We just haven't reached the peak of this cycle yet. This is one metric that is indicating that we haven't reached the peak. There are many metrics across the board that I will, go into in other videos, and you can find many metrics that would just indicate that we haven't peaked yet. So at the very least, that is the good news. At the very least, this cycle, I don't believe, has peaked yet, but we are getting much later into the cycle. We're getting much later into the liquidity cycles. And so I believe that this expansion will probably be relatively rapid and could potentially go into my original thesis for this cycle was based on the 4-year cycle, where it's probably going to peak in Q4 of this year. And now it's looking like tentatively it's likely that that's going to get pushed into next year sometime. Now, how we trade that is a totally different ball game. This is just the analysis coming into play. And I am most likely going to have a great deal of my chips off of the table this year rather than waiting until next year, because even though, yes, the data is showing it's highly likely that it gets pushed into next year, how you trade that is different. And if you got in early enough with enough projects, you maybe necessarily don't need to at least hold on to all of your bags until that time. So anyway, just food for thought as far as that goes. So let's just dive in to our typical weekly analysis. I can get rid of this here. So I know this is a little messy, but we've talked about it many times. Again, in that seasonal period with between August and October, where typically we see a low form or a sideways consolidation. You can see lows forming during this period. Kind of seems like that's what we're doing right now. So like I said, I know that this chart is quite messy, but let's just kind of dive in and look at some of the parts individually. And I'll go to a cleaner chart for that. So here's this seasonal period that we're talking about. Again, the trend line that we've been tracking every single week from the 2017 peak to the 2021 peak, finding it as resistance and then support and then resistance again. We have been rejected very cleanly off of that support line, or excuse me, that resistance line. And we've also talked about this 3 red week rule, where we've gone over that several times in the channel, but just briefly, anytime we have these 3 red weeks, it's very typical for price action to breach the low of that signal. Now, it could be brief, it could just wick down, but over 80% of the time, price breaches the low of that signal. So it's highly likely at this point that we are going to breach these lows. That doesn't mean that we're over, because I have this 50% tool here, which is something that I use on the channel. It's a fib retracement tool using the settings 1, 0.5, and 0. Anything above this line right here is considered in strength, right? So any price action in this zone is typically strong. If we have closes and lower highs in this zone, we probably going to have to talk about that, but we're not there yet, right? One step at a time. Everybody's basically, we have not extreme fear, but very close to extreme fear in the market right now. And if you've been following on the channel, we've been waiting for this. We've been waiting for this for over a month, basically, for price action to breach this level. Potentially this last couple weeks, the last 3 weeks here to the upside, everybody was getting very excited. We knew ahead of time it was highly unlikely that we were going to see further price action to the north because of the several times that we've seen this 3 red week signal play out. The last time we saw it was right here. And again, we breached the lows. This was more of a significant correction. Not saying that that's exactly what has to happen this time, but it could. And we're just going to have to follow along the charts and see how that goes. And let's see, what else do we have? Let me just turn the volume off to clean that up a little bit. The other thing that I talk about quite often is my speed line, and I'll draw a speed line from the low to the high, project that right off of the low to see how does this move compare to the previous move. And I've done that before in these moves here, and basically it showed that this move right here was stronger. So we were gaining strength, gaining momentum as time went off on over through the corrections. And right now it's seeming like we're actually losing a little bit of steam. So we are seeing some weakness in Bitcoin. At the same time, we're starting to see some strength in the dominance of the others and with the total crypto market cap. This is kind of typically what you would expect to see later in the cycle where Bitcoin is going to give its dominance away to the other altcoins. And that's what we're seeing. It takes weeks and months to play out. Most people don't have the patience for that, but that's what we do on this channel. We're just going to follow every week and see what we can see or see what the charts are telling us. Okay. So I'm not saying that we have to come down here, but it's highly likely that we will. And if price does go in the other direction, that just means that signal fails. No signal is 100%. And then we just have to follow the charts at that time. But one thing I do want to mention is we are technically in a weekly downtrend. On the weekly time frame, we have lower highs and we have lower lows. And you want to go with the trend. So right now, the trend on a weekly basis, which is a pretty strong trend, is down. And until we get confirmation to the north side, we have to expect lower prices, whether we like that or not. But if we're prepared for it, at the very least, we won't get shaken out because we know the signal is in play. It's likely that we're going to breach these lows, but possibly not for a very long time, is what I'm trying to say. That could be short-lived. We could get wicks to the downside and quickly recover, especially later in the cycle when things get more volatile and more emotionally volatile. You could expect these corrections to maybe not be as long lasting. Okay, so that's something we've been tracking for a very long time. And let's dive into Bitcoin dominance and see how Bitcoin dominance is playing out. Been talking for a very long time. We had this ascending wedge that Bitcoin dominance broke out of, and then we also broke down from this channel, coming back up for a retest. And we can see if we use the same 50% tool and apply the same analysis here, it's in a weak spot right now, coming up to retest some of these resistance levels, potentially even the 50% level. We're just going to have to see how things react to this. But on the very short term, we are getting very short term, we are getting some rejection here, but it could be possible. We're just coming up for a retest of this trend before we break down in a larger way. Okay. Like I said, a lot of people don't have the patience for this, which is unfortunate because honestly, investing isn't necessarily fun or sexy. Trading isn't necessarily fun or sexy. A lot of people don't want to hear that. They just want to hear, when am I going to make money? When am I going to make money? And it's like, well, you're going to have to be patient because markets go sideways 80% of the time and they trend 20% of the time. And so if you're a long only investor, you're going to have to wait quite a long time before those trends start to move in your favor. Now, you can short the market as well. That's not something that I do, but a lot of people can do it successfully, but you really have to have a plan there, right? You have to know what you're doing. It's not advisable to try to short the market in a bull market. Okay. We can save the shorting the market for the bear market. That's going to be, basically putting the odds in our favor. Okay. So Bitcoin dominance still on the verge of breaking down potentially even more. We have the USDT dominance right here, testing this trend that goes back basically the same, kind of mirrors the Bitcoin trend where that we had that multi-year resistance line, we have this multi-year support line. We broke down below it once in a previous kind of alt season where we did have some money flow into the alts and then quickly back into the dollar. And now we're kind of sloshing around as well, where we don't really have very clear trends. Excuse me, we do. We have actually a weekly uptrend in the USDT dominance, which would be expected if Bitcoin is in a weekly downtrend. So expect higher prices, expect more money to be flowing back into USDT dominance until proven otherwise. We are currently getting a rejection. I like to see this. This is why these tools are so amazing here. We have that same 50% tool. Anything below here is weak. Anything above is strong. We didn't see any closes above this. So that is the first indication that the market is telling us that maybe this money flowing back into the USDT is actually slowing down. We'll have to see how the coming weeks react to this, but we have not had any closes above this shorter term 50% level. Okay, so gonna just have to basically keep an eye on that. Something that I've been tracking on the channel for quite some time is this level right here. And if we get a breakdown from that, basically I have in anything in this zone, I think is basically going to be liquidity sloshing around. I think Bitcoin and large caps are going to do quite well. And then if we do happen to get a breakdown of this level, that's when I think we're going to see that altcoin mania that everybody's been waiting for. Effectively, everything's quiet right now. There's a lot of fear in the market. People are getting chased out. They're getting kicked out of their positions. That's why they call it a bull market, because it's very hard to deal with that emotional volatility. If we do get that breakdown, that's when I think we're going to have mega altcoin season mania. So there's some more hoping for you there. And the others dominance, very, very, very slowly trying to work its way into an uptrend. So this is actually very interesting. We have the others dominance in an uptrend whilst Bitcoin has been in a downtrend. So it's just very subtle early signs that the others could potentially start seeing some more strength. And we have to, again, keep coming back to the charts week after week to see how this actually plays out, to see how we're actually doing. But we want to see a breakout in this chart, basically. We have this kind of symmetrical triangle sort of playing out. The volatility is decreasing and price is getting constricted. We would love to see the bulls would love to see a breakout of these levels and basically start targeting higher prices in the others dominance. So let's see what else we have for the weekly. I'll just go into the total three. I do total three minus the stable coins just to kind of give me a more accurate representation of the actual altcoin market. You can use whichever one you like. They're both good. They're all going to tell a similar story. They're all going to tell a slightly different story. So we still have yet to break out into fresh cycle highs for this chart. And we also are potentially on the verge of a fourth time breakout as well. Gann teaches us that when price reaches a price level for the fourth time, if it breaks through, it typically is a genuine move. And so that is also another exciting thing to see. And also we have this cup and handle forming. So cup and handle is pretty bullish sign. There are ways that you could project price if that's something that you like to do. You draw a line from the bottom of the cup up to basically the neckline, I'll call it, out from, and then project that from the breakout point, and you can see this could be a potential area to get to for the total crypto market, right? So again, this is basically just lagging Bitcoin. Like it's not into fresh high prices like Bitcoin. Basically, you had the S&P 500 go into fresh highs before Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin went into fresh highs, and now you have the total three potentially going to fresh highs, just farther and farther down the risk curve as people make their money in real estate and the stock market. They go farther down the risk curve into things like Bitcoin, and as they make their money into Bitcoin, they go farther and farther down the risk curve. Also, people who are new to the cycle have to go farther and farther down the risk curve to see the gains that they've missed out on the last several years. So this is basically good price action we like to see, primed for a breakout, and the human psychology is also starting to basically play its role. Where I don't think we're also sentiment-wise, we're nowhere near a top because we just haven't seen that yet. The other thing that I do want to mention, if I drop this down to a daily, I got lots of messy charts here. Let's see if I can find one that's not so crazy. On a daily time frame, if we're getting really granular, I don't have the fear and greed index with me, but I can tell you that right here we have a low. The fear was higher on this, even though price was higher. This is a divergence between price and the sentiment. This is a very key thing that I really like to see. Again, doesn't mean that price can't go farther down from here, but this is also a very good initial sign that we're on the right track because we had fear here and basically near extreme fear here, which is a very, very good sign because that's actually almost identical to the signal that we had in the beginning at the beginning of the market, where we had fear here and then extreme fear here. This extreme fear happened at a higher price, and that basically kicked off the bull market. So finding those divergences between price and sentiment can be very helpful when you're doing your analysis. So I think that's actually going to wrap it up for this week. Again, if you made it this far, please like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below, constructive criticism. Leave me some ideas for some future videos that you'd like to see. As far as the weekly analysis goes, I think that's it. Possibly further downside before finishing the year strong, as we've been keeping track for the last several weeks. I think the market's basically continuing to play ball and continuing to basically perform as it's been telling us that it may potentially do so. That nobody knows what's happening on the right hand side of the charts. But if we learn how to read what the market is telling us in real time, we can pick up on those subtle clues and basically drown out the rest of the market, the rest of the noise, the rest of the narratives that come along with it, and just go back to what the charts say. Fundamentals can be important in creating a thesis, like I discussed earlier in the video. However, I think the technicals will basically price in all of the fundamentals that there can be. There are businesses out there that spend hundreds of millions of dollars on research, and they have office buildings full of people pushing paper, trying to figure out where these things are going to go, and that all informs their buying and selling decisions. And that buying and selling shows up on a price chart. So if you can learn how to read a price chart, I think that that's actually going to set you up for success in a bigger way. So anyway, hopefully that was helpful. Like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks, guys.